G'day guys, my name's Alex, I'm from Physio. Today I'm going to talk about how to treat a muscle strain and a muscle tear. By the time you finish watching this video, you're going to understand what they are and how I can treat them by using the 5-phase approach that I like to use for all muscle strains and tears. And this isn't voodoo science, this is just the facts of rehab from a sports physio on how you can treat your muscle injuries. So what is a strain or a tear and how do they occur? Generally speaking, a strain or a tear occurs with a moment in time episode of pain. So you were running, you were lifting, you felt a stabbing sensation, a popping sensation. People experience these slightly differently, but you've had a moment in time where you felt something occur. You've then either got some reduced strength or pain on contraction or pain on movement. Now there's different grades of injuries. You've got grade 0, which is more of like a neuromuscular response, meaning that you've pulled something but there's no actual fiber damage. A grade 1 injury where there's fiber damage but the actual integrity of the muscle is still solid. Very small tear in the muscle, and it's more symptomatic. These recover quite quickly. You've got a grade 2 tear, which is up to 50% tearing of a muscle. This tends to be, you've got a defect in the muscle. It's a bit sore when you contract. You've definitely got some reduced strength. You've then got grade 3, which is up to 90%, so 50% to 90%. This is where the majority of the muscle is torn. There'll definitely be a noticeable defect palpably with the muscle. You're very weak in contraction, and it's quite sore. Some people, they're not as sore, funnily enough, because the nerves that are in there can be damaged, and when you damage the nerve, it can't send those pain signals to the brain. And then depending on what textbook you read, you've got a grade 4 or a 3+, which is a rupture. And so those high-grade muscle injuries definitely need to be seen by a professional. They need to most likely be scanned so that you can have your your injury looked after properly, because in some cases, if the muscle's pulled off the bone, you may need to have surgical intervention for that. But for the most people, they just have a grade 1 or a grade 2 muscle injury. You don't need to have imaging for most of these, and they can just be managed conservatively with rehab. So we have the 5-phase approach. So in the first phase, it's just the acute management phase. This is what we do to settle it down. I like the peace and love acronym: protect it, elevate it, avoid anti-inflammatory use in the first 72 hours, compress it. I like to educate patients that your body does know what it's doing. Listen to your symptoms. If it tells you to not do that, don't do that. It's in that first 72 hours or so. The love part of the acronym is we need to load it by starting to walk on it, starting to use it if it's an upper body muscle injury, as your symptoms allow. We then want to just maintain optimism about the injury. We don't want to develop a bad relationship with the pain, with the injury. We can catastrophize and start to develop pain, increased levels of pain and chronic pain if we sort of develop that bad relationship with that injury. So stay optimistic with your injury. Vascularization, keep walking, get in the pool, cross-train around your injury, because increased levels of blood flow can help that healing response. And then E in the LOVE acronym for exercise, we want to start loading it, restoring mobility, restoring strength, and restoring the correct properties to that muscle. And I cover the love and peace acronym in an entire video by itself, so go check that out. So that's the first phase already done. And that might take anywhere between 48 hours up to a week, just depending on the severity of the injury and your own personal response. The second phase is the subacute phase. So this is when we start getting moving properly. So in this phase, we're really just trying to get a pain-free contraction. We're trying to trying to contract that muscle, and we want this pain to go away on contraction, just like a moderate level of resistance. We're starting to get back to doing all our activities of daily living. So we're now walking normally if it was a hamstring or a calf. We're now starting to use our limb if it was an upper body strain. So we're getting a pain-free contraction, we're restoring normal movements, and now we're starting to introduce some proper load exercises where we're starting to restore movement to that muscle. So if it was a hamstring, I can now straighten my leg. I've gotten all my mobility back in this phase. And then I'm starting to maybe do some very early strengthening exercises. So if it was a calf tear, a double foot body weight calf raise. If it was a quad tear, I'm just doing some very gentle push exercises, like maybe a body weight squat. I'm just starting to restore movement to this area. I'm starting to load it gradually. Once you've got the ability for a pain-free contraction, your mobility is back, so you've restored close to 100%, 90% plus of your mobility compared to the other side, we can then graduate out of this second phase and into the third phase. So you're doing really well already, you're already into the third phase. Now, this third phase is the basic building, strengthening phase of the rehab. And this is where most people will spend the majority of the rehab. This is where the bulk of the rehab is done. So in this phase, we want to break it down into isolated strengthening of the specific muscle. So if that was a quad tear, we want to be doing things like leg press, leg extension, specific strengthening of that muscle, and then compare it to the other leg. And then also I like to compare it to my body weight. So if I'm 100 kilos, but I can only push 50 kilos once on both legs, then I'm probably not very strong in the first place, and maybe that was a risk factor as to why I got injured in the first place. But if my right leg, let's say I can push it for 150 kilos once, but my left leg can only push for 40 kilos because I've just injured it, then I know that I've got some work to do. I need to start strengthening up my left leg to get it similar to the right leg. So get your isolated muscle strength back, and that's the same if it was calf, it would be calf raises, it would be hamstring curls. Now, how do we do that? We pick the level of exercise that we can do that isn't painful. We can do it without it really hurting us too much. A little bit of discomfort afterwards is fine. And then we want to progressively make those exercises harder. So it could be like a double leg body weight squat, and then a single leg body weight squat. And then we can add in weight onto that single leg squat. Or it could be a hamstring curl with double legs into a single leg hamstring curl, and then we keep adding more weight. So we just want to start loading and strengthening that isolated movement. Once we start doing that, we can then start to introduce more global strengthening to the body. So we can start getting back into our compound movements, so like our back squats and our RDLs, and just in a very light way, start to reintroduce that. So we've got isolated strength, generalized body strengthening. And in this third phase, we're starting to introduce our running if it was a lower limb injury. So we're just starting our jog. And by the end of the phase, we've progressed through to about, if it was sprinting for a hamstring, up to like 70%. If it was an upper body, let's say you're a thrower and you've hurt your shoulder, it might be underarm throws at the start, 5-meter throws by the middle, and 10 to 15-meter throws by the end. But you're using it quite hard, but it's not a fast velocity type movement. We're not doing much speed work or anything in this phase. So isolated strength, compound strength, functional strengthening, so the running that you were doing, we're getting up to a bit of a jog by the end of it. And then once we've sort of built that capacity, so your leg is as strong as the other side, at least 90%, all your compound lifts, you're starting to get back into compound lifts. So if it was 100 kilos that you could squat, we're now at about sort of 70 kilos. So we're about 70% of all our other stuff that we were doing. And our running load or our throwing load is about at 70% as well. Then we can move into phase 4. So phase 4 is sports preparation. So this is when we're starting to move quicker because I've got just about all my strength back in that torn muscle. I'm now progressing from about 70% of my compound lifts, so my squats and my deadlifts and all that sort of just general stuff. We're now progressing that through to about 80 to 90%. I'm now increasing my running load and I'm introducing speed. So that might be going from my 60-70% running that I was doing before to about 80% to progressing up to 90% during this phase. Instead of throwing 10-15 meters, I'm now throwing 20 meters, 25 meters. I'm really starting to use that muscle a lot more in a very controlled environment. I'm now introducing like skills. So if it was a quad tear, I could be doing inside passes. If it was a football, I could be doing some very gentle laces kicking. I could be doing batting if it was cricket or baseball. You can start to introduce low-level amounts of your sport. Once we've sort of developed that, we're now using our body with speed, we can then progress on to the 5th phase, which is our return to sport phase. So we're really starting to introduce all the facets of what you do in your sport. If that's just running, it's running at increased speeds. If that's rugby, it's introducing team skills. We're introducing lots of things because you've got 100% of your strength back in that leg. All your compound lifts are now back to 90% of what they were before injury. We're now sprinting progressively through this phase up to max speed. We're now starting to, if it was throwing, starting to throw close to full volume. And by the time we've finished this phase, you've at least done 2 weeks worth of your training at full unrestricted training by the time you go back. So you've got full isolated strength, near full compound lifts, you've got nearly full use of all your velocity and speed stuff, and then by the time you get back to training, you've got all of it back during this phase. And that's the 5 phases that I use to guide my rehab. It's very structured. I don't move on from my phase 3 isolated strength building phase. I don't move from that until I've got the majority, if not all of it, back into my sports prep, where I'm now introducing speed, because you don't want to introduce speed until you've got your base strength back. I'm not going to do my 5th phase of return to sport until I've introduced myself to speed and throwing or whatever my injury is in a controlled environment. I'm not going to touch team stuff until I know I can do it on my own. So it's a very systematic approach, guys. I really hope that's helped just shed some light on what a rehab should look like. If your rehab doesn't look like that, then keep following the channel, because I'm going to put out more content like this in the future. If you have any requests, leave me a comment. And of course, obviously, if you like the video, chuck me a like, chuck me a subscribe, and I'll see you in another one. Thanks a lot, guys.